So, you know, in any profession, there can be bias shown. And so clearly in law enforcement, we're not immune to that. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're hiring the right folks for the job. It's important that we make sure that we train folks in the behavior that we want to see emulated out on the streets. And I think it's important that we don't forget as leadership that we have to continue to do things that is going to expand a person's empathetic compassion for the people that they serve. I've only been here for 4 short months, and I can honestly say that I've been amazed at what our folks do here. I know that those issues exist around the country because I don't have my head buried in sand. I watch the news and know that nationally there are some challenges that are going on. And I think that it's important for all of us in law enforcement, even if it doesn't directly impact us to be aware and to try to take steps to avoid being put in the same predicament or having those kind of circumstances. My guess is most police departments have a code of conduct or policies that address the expectations for how their members are to behave. And you know, each department has their own processes for how they hold people accountable. I think we do a really good job of that with our policies, but we, since I've been here, have already identified some areas where we could probably shore those policies up, and that's what we'll be doing here in short order. You know, I don't know exactly what their training was about, but I can tell you my observation of what I saw in the video of the incident involving Mr. George Floyd was that it was wrong, that it was not the way that we expect officers to conduct themselves. I can't erase from my mind hearing the cries, the pleas from folks that were bystanders, and the look that appeared to be on the officer's face as he refused to take any action, any efforts to try to make sure that Mr. Floyd was doing okay. So I was disturbed by those images, and I felt that yesterday's verdict was justice. I definitely think it's unfortunate that we have to do that. I have a little bit of a different view because I've been asked on a number of occasions throughout my career to explain to people what the steps are for how they should interact with law enforcement should they end up in a traffic stop situation. And I try to make sure that when we're talking to kids and I'm invited out to speak, that I explain to them what the officer's concerns should be with regards to officer safety, but at the same time, let our citizens know that if they feel in any way that their rights are being violated, that they're not being treated fairly, that they do have recourse. But the time for that recourse isn't during the stop itself maybe, or not during that particular contact. It's after that circumstance when they should be able to get with their parent if they're a child, or if they're an adult on their own. Go into the police department or contact a supervisor and make the essential report. We do, but in a broader context. It's not, to me, just about the traffic stop, although that is a part of what we need to be concerned about in terms of our citizens having some fear. To me, it's making sure that our officers know that they are expected to treat people with respect, and that we do have a code of conduct that they're expected to adhere to, or there will be consequences. And the fortunate thing for me is that I'm in a department that that has department members that not only recognize that and live that creed every day, but I also have a community that is extremely supportive of what we do. And when you combine a supportive community with officers that understand how to make sure that they respect the sanctity of human life, you end up with an outstanding police department, people that you are proud to serve alongside, and that you know day in, day out, they do the best they can for our citizens.
Exactly. How do you feel about being welcome here in this community, as well as your family?
It is at times overwhelming. I will tell you that when I first got here, I knew I made the right decision. There's not a time when I am not out in public where citizens don't come up to me and they tell me, welcome, and we are thankful that you're here. And that resonates so much. Being the first African-American police chief, I have to remind myself that that is the case, because oftentimes I just see myself as a police chief. And I feel like our members see me as just a police chief. And I'm quickly seeing that that's the way our community perceives me. And so I have to be reminded that I'm black as a police chief of the department, the first in the history of this department. And that's also a good feeling.
Exactly. Being that first.
You know, sometimes I have to get out of my own way. Because I can be my own worst critic, and sometimes, you know, it's human nature to want to go there and to kind of to start to wonder if certain things happen because of your race. And it's important for me to get that affirmation, that feedback from the people in our community when they say, hey, we appreciate what you do every day just because you're you. You know, and race doesn't seem to be an issue. And I think some folks might find that amazing, because they would expect that being in West Texas, because of the stereotypes that get created because of our Western themes and our culture, you know, they might think that things would not be as welcoming for a black man being a police chief. And I want to make sure I push back against that narrative. That's not the case. I think our officers are conscientious that people may react in some aspects a little bit more hostile or negative towards them because of this national narrative. And I think they've dealt with that well. We have so many checks and balances, though, in law enforcement today, and especially within the Abilene Police Department. You know, every traffic stop is recorded with us knowing where the location of the officer is. We also have in-car cameras and body-worn cameras that activate right away when a traffic stop is made. We have recordings of the audio when transmissions are made on the radio. So that it becomes very, very difficult for you to try to change the narrative of how a traffic stop went when you have that much information at your fingertips. I will tell you, the vast majority of law enforcement officers are excited to have the cameras because it reaffirms the great job that they do in policing. But yeah, maybe for someone who had ill intentions, it may be something that corrects behavior. But regardless, it's a tool that has, the technology has advanced to the point of it's made it a great tool for us in law enforcement, and I don't see it going away.
Exactly. And I don't know if you know, but like new updates with iPhone, you can now say like, tell Siri that you're getting pulled over, and your own personal camera will start recording. So it does help out with like people just feeling less safety if it is at a traffic stop or anything like that. But as well, let me see if I have a.
Chief, do you mind if I ask a question?
No, not at all. Go ahead.
And you can look at Marion while
Okay.
answering this. As we saw recently in a stop that was recorded on camera, a lieutenant in the military was being pulled over and drove to a lit location, like a well-lit location. If people feel the need to do that, obviously the officer is going to be on heightened alert, as they should be. But what would you tell people who feel the need to do that and doesn't that already make the situation tense?
I think that you know, if someone feels uncomfortable with making the stop where an officer has initiated the contact, you know, officers understand that there needs to be, that there can be a reasonable amount of distance where they follow someone to a more safely lit area. What I would oftentimes suggest to folks, though, is that maybe you put your emergency hazards on to say that you acknowledge, you recognize that the officer is attempting to stop you, that you slow your speeds down so that it's clear to the officer that you recognize, you acknowledge, and you're not trying to elude the traffic stop. You know, those are some steps that a citizen can take if they feel like they want to, you know, pull into an area that's a little bit more well lit. Another thing that, you know, I encourage a citizen to do is, you know, if you're really that anxious, if you're that concerned, and especially when we talk about an unmarked unit pulling someone over, feel free to dial 911 and call and talk to dispatch and say, you've got a unit that's behind you with its lights on, it's wanting you to pull over, and you know, you are wanting to comply, but you want to make sure it's that it's a police officer. And dispatch will promptly let you know, and they'll also radio to the officer, hey, the citizen's concerned, didn't know you were an officer, and that communication can take place. But some form of an acknowledgement that you know that the officer's behind you and that you have the intent to stop is definitely what should be done to keep you from running afoul and facing additional charges. There's definitely that potential. One of the difficulties in what we do is that you have, you know, sometimes less than a second to be able to react to something. And that means the mind has to trigger that reaction, and for you physically to go through the mechanics of whatever it is that you feel needs to occur based on the threat that you feel that you face. And so it's impossible for us to shake our officers from having that reluctance to want to engage. But what we can do is to try to ingrain, to try to train officers to understand that whatever action you take, you need to make sure that you're justified and that you can articulate why you took that action. And so that can sometimes you know, lessen a person's fear of not reacting when they should, just simply by ingraining within them that it's okay to take the action. Just be able to articulate why you did it.
Exactly, and kind of slow things down a little bit, because sometimes I feel like
We did, I was asked that question earlier, but I'll just reiterate that I cannot shake from my memory what I saw in the video and the cries that I heard from the crowd for the officers to lessen the physical restraints or things that they were doing, for the officer to get his knee off of the neck of Mr. George Floyd. And like you know, most of our other citizens, not being able to shake that says that something occurred that just didn't seem right, that seemed wrong. And so when that verdict came down, I felt that the verdict was justice.
There were other officers standing around the officer that had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, and nobody really intervened, the officers, even when other people, the crowd, and you talked about the crowd crying and asking the officer to stop. How important is it for an officer to intervene when they see something like that of their colleagues, of other officers? And do you guys emphasize that? Emphasize you know, keeping an eye out for other officers and their actions.
So one of the things that I was deliberate about when I first got here was sitting down with our patrol officers in briefings. And among a number of different things we talked about, I would always tell them at the end of those briefings that it was important to me that each officer take care of themselves. I then would also let them know that it's important to me that they not only take care of themselves, but that it's important that they take care of each other. And what I would explain to them is that if an officer has had to chase after someone, ultimately use some form of a use of force, and then put some handcuffs on someone, that when they arrive on scene, it is their job to not be afraid to step up and tap that officer out and say, I got you. Go ahead and catch your wind, gather up your gear, I got you. And if I have to do a supplemental report, I'll do what I need to do, but you need a break. And so one of the things that will come about with some policy changes that we're implementing is that we've added a duty to intervene to our policies to reinforce that as what we expect our members to do. And so I think it's critically important for us to make sure that the old days, the old style of, hey, if you catch the bad person, then it's your job to write your report and clean up the mess. Those days are gone, that we need to be thinking about ways that we can lessen the load, lessen the burden, so that it doesn't become as intense, if at all possible.
That's all I got.
That's all I got too, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chief.
Thank
All
you so
right.
much.